Hello, this is Dr. Young, and I'm going to talk about, this is chapter 16, your last chapter. I'm going to talk about organizational development, change, and organizational change, actually. Is that what we got? I think it's right, just change. Okay, so we're going to talk about change, the process, approaches to organizational development, a resistance to change, and the keys to managing successful change and learning, development and learning. So what we're going to talk about first is the processes for planned organizational change. I should have put organizational. I'll change that. So there's different processes. And the first one is Lewin's process model, which is in your text. So what this is obviously if you're going to change your organization, make a major change, it requires a systemic process. You got to move from one condition to another. So there's unfreezing, change, and refreezing. That is unfreezing, that means, okay, everybody, we have an issue, we need to change, and you communicate that to everyone. And then you have to have a strategy for that change, so you're going to move from the old way to a new way. And then refreezing is solidification of new behaviors, making them permanent. And then there's the continuous change process, which basically says that there's kind of a continuous, I guess, a environment where continuous change is kind of reinforced. In this case, there's forces for change, a problem-solving process, a change agent, and transition management. It takes a top management perspective where they perceive forces and trends that indicate the need for change. They determine the top management determines what alternatives there are for change, and then it selects the appropriate alternative. So in that case, the change agent is someone that's responsible for managing that effort. They assist the management that decides there's a change needed with problem recognition and definition of that problem. They can be involved in evaluating or generating the action plans. They're also can be outsourced or inside the organization. They can be consultant. There are actually people that go in and help an organization make a huge change. They implement the change. They measure and evaluate that change and the results. And the transition management is the process of systematically planning, organizing, and implementing the change. So that is something that, somebody can come in, and I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but there are companies that, like I said, you could go online and Google change management, and you could find companies that basically send people to do this. It's like once the change is done and implemented and they've evaluated it, they don't, they're not employed there anymore. They might be consulted later, but, they're not an employee there. So, or they could be, just depends. Organization development is the development and reinforcement of strategies, structures, processes for improving. So system-wide organizational development is structural change. So that is like when you might actually change the organizational structure, task division, authority, reporting relationships. That's like if you change from, I don't know, like a divisional to a matrix organization, or a projectized organization, or maybe you decided to be a functional organization. That's a major restructuring that affects everything: appraisals, rewards, decision making, communication, IT, everything, information processing, everything. It's a big, huge change. Task and technological change is task redesign. So, let's say that, there was a technological change years ago when I worked at GE, and this is when I was young, and I answered phones all day. Well, guess what happened when I was doing that job, when I first kind of started doing it? There was a change, a big change. And what was happening is that people were wanting to email companies instead of call them. So then the IT, began to, they made a website for the company, and then people were beginning to email us. So now we had to start answering emails. So that required a little bit different technology. So there was a task redesigned for my job. Instead of answering phones all day, I was answering emails half the day and phones half the day. So that's just a simple example. But that happens all the time. Tasks change when technology comes into play. Technological change changes how inputs are transformed into outputs, and that can be some kind of software program that helps you do what you normally would have done by hand or something like that. Griffin's integrated framework for introducing job changes includes 9 steps that reflect the complexities of interfaces. And in this case, whoops, this is in your text as well. And so you want to make sure to review those. I didn't list them all, so I didn't want to, because I knew you were going to read about them. People-oriented change techniques, training, management, development, team building, and survey feedback. These are all change techniques that you will go through in an organizational change. Training is important in a change because it improves current job skills or the new skills if there needs to be new skills. And here are the methods that are used often in that training. Sometimes what happens with that is that you have to transfer the learning to the workplace, and it's easy to sit there and give a lecture about how to improve your job skills, but it's another thing to actually put that into practice. And there's also management development programs. It's usually a long-term process, and there's no quick and simple approach. Those are things like when and it can be more difficult depending on what the change is. For example, if there's going to be some, like for example, I'm teaching a class I teach lean. And if you're not familiar with lean, in that case, if you're a manager that's going through a lean transformation, your role as a manager changes big time. And instead of just handing down directives to your employees, you become more of a consultant role, an observer, and a collaborator. And it is a very different role. So in this case, these management development programs can be very lengthy, costly, and very difficult. So it just depends. These programs can be very very difficult. In this case, I would say the value is important because you're really changing your roles. It just depends on what kind of leadership change what change is occurring in the organization, how it will affect your management position, and what you do in managing, like the functions of management, is probably the biggest factor in the effectiveness of this and the quality of training. And team building change, you have to set team goals. Team building goals are to set goals and priorities, analyze, allocate work, examine how a group is working. Do they work well together? Do they work independently? Is there a lot of conflict? These two, actually, the relationships would be more involved in the relationships, but do they work effectively together? Are they productive? Are they creating? Are they coming up with a product or whatever they're doing, project work, if they're coming up with solutions together? Are they cohesive? Those kinds of things When it comes to change, during a change process, so you've got your manager issues, you got training, training the managers, training, and then you've got the change going on. So you've got the groups that are responsible for the change, which are the teams, which we just talked about. How are they working together, and what is their relationships like, and is that working out okay? Is that moving through? Is the teamwork effective? And then survey feedback is basically evaluating how things are going by getting information about employee beliefs and attitudes. In that case, that obviously assists management with problem solving, conflict. The data is returned to employee groups at all levels. So the whole organization can see how employees are feeling about certain things or what attitudes are going on throughout the organization. And that data is used by all employees working together in their normal work groups to identify and solve the problems during this change process. And then there's resistance to change, which is organizations invite change when change offers an advantage. But they also resist change when change threatens the organization's structure and controls. So a lot of times, if they're going through a major organizational change, this is going to definitely cause problems because, they're going to resist it because it's such a huge change. There's a lot of different, results. Like, for example, like I mentioned earlier, a company's going through a change from functional to divisional or matrix might be a lot of job changes, a lot of reporting changes, things that are going to cause, it could even cause layoffs or other things. There's just so many factors involved that will cause this resistance to change. They have to balance stability with a need to react to external shifts. So you probably want to minimize as much as you can, but, because it's a very delicate balance. If employees feel that there's no stability in an organization, what happens? They lose those employees. You get high turnover, and during a change, you may not want that because you need all the resources that you can keep. So this is a very delicate balance. And then too much resistance can warn of the need to re-examine the need for a change. Do we really have to change this much? Is there some things that we can keep? Can we shift resources, or can we make it to where we can make as minimal disturbance to the stability while making the needed changes we need to progress and grow? There are many sources of resistance to change. The organizational sources are all of these. And these are all problems that, all the sources can come from this. Organizational and individual. Fear of the unknown, lack of awareness, economic factors, security, habit, social factors. So these are all the sources of resistance. Threatened expertise, threatened power, that's a big one. So these are all, reasons why, basically sources of that resistance. So you want to make sure you're familiar with these. It's very, you get a lot of situations where you have changes and you have people that have been in positions for a long time and they're threatened. They feel like, oh no, here comes some, rearranging and I have to train someone and they're going to take my job eventually and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of different factors here. So make sure you're familiar with those. Keys to managing. I like to start small. You have to consider the big picture as well as what's going on inside the organization. Sometimes you have to make changes in order to keep the company going. It's better to have, you might have to make some layoffs, you might have some redundancies, you have to make some difficult decisions sometimes in change, depending on what that change is. But you have to take the big view of the organization. Start small, secure top management support, and encourage participation by those affected by the change as much as possible. Make them feel like they're a part of it. Make them feel like they're helping. And, open communication is important. Keeping everyone abreast of what's going on with the changes constantly is important. And those who contribute, help them. Reward them. Give them some type of recognition. Sometimes it's a situation where the change has to happen, or there's going to be more damage than if the change does happen. Most of the time that's the case. So, in that case, you just have to make the best of it and try to communicate as much as possible. Organizational learning. A learning organization is an organization that facilitates the learning of all members and transforms itself constantly. And that is something you're going to read about in your text. Lots of training, lots of development opportunities, lots of looking forward to skills that might be useful and giving opportunities to learn those skills. That's kind of a learning organization. Okay, and then an after action review. That is something that basically is done after an event to figure out what happened, why it happened, strengths and weaknesses. It's conducted for good successes of the organization and failures. And the goal is learning, which we talked about learning organizations back here. This is part of that. So in that case, good and bad, you're basically reviewing it, what you did right, what you did wrong. Never assign credit or blame, just learning, okay, this is a good thing, the event is a success. How do we do this again in the future? How do we maintain that? Or if failures, how do we learn from that and move on? So that is just a activity done to evaluate that. And here are the questions that you might ask. Questions that might be asked after that. What did we learn? What happened? And, these are just additional questions to evaluate that. And that's part of the organizational learning. So organizations that focus on that will continually do these types of activities and monitor and measure those things. So that's it for this week and the last chapter. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know. And make sure you've read that, some of these things that we went over, there's more detail in your text, so just make sure to read that in detail. And if you have any questions, let me know. Have a great week, and best of luck to you after class. It's been great being your instructor this term. Keep my email address if there's anything I can ever do to help you in the future. Thanks again.